I froze mid-step, the music fading into the background as my eyes locked onto his, my son, standing at the entrance of the club. His expression was a mix of disbelief and something I couldn't quite place. What was Eric doing here, of all places? My heart raced as I realized. The life I had fought so hard to keep hidden was unraveling before my very eyes. Eric and I had always been a team. From the moment he took his first steps to the day he graduated high school, it was always us against the world. His father had walked out when Eric was just a boy, leaving me to pick up the pieces of a shattered marriage. The pain of those days was something I rarely spoke of. I had to be strong for Eric. He didn't need to know how often I cried myself to sleep, or how much I feared failing him. Our life wasn't perfect, but we made it work. I took on odd jobs to make ends meet, sacrificing my dreams so Eric could chase his. He was my pride, my anchor in a storm I sometimes thought would never end. Watching him grow into a kind, thoughtful young man had been my greatest joy, even if the journey had been lonely at times. But what he didn't know, what I had hidden so carefully, was the secret life I lived to provide for us. By day, I was just Anna, a single mother scraping by. By night, I stepped into a world where I wasn't just invisible anymore. At the club, I was someone else entirely. A performer, a star. For a few hours, I could forget the weight of the bills, the judgment of society, and the loneliness that came with motherhood. The guilt, however, never truly left. I didn't want Eric to see this side of me. To him, I was his mother, the woman who packed his lunches, helped him with his homework, and cheered him on at soccer games. I wanted to keep it that way. He deserved to see me as his rock, not as someone who danced under the neon lights for strangers' applause. But lately, Eric had seemed distant. More reserved, quieter. I chalked it up to the natural growing pains of a young man finding his way in the world. Little did I know that his path was about to cross mine in a way I never expected, a way that would change everything between us. The life I had so carefully compartmentalized was about to collide with the one I shared with him, and I wasn't sure either of us was ready for what came next. It started with small, almost imperceptible shifts in Eric's behavior. He'd been spending more time away from home, coming back later than usual, his responses to my questions about his day growing more vague. Just busy with college, he'd say, or meeting up with friends. On the surface, there was nothing unusual, but as a mother, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Then there were his looks, the moments when I'd catch him staring at me with a mix of curiosity and something else I couldn't quite place. He seemed older somehow, more contemplative. I dismissed it as my imagination, a symptom of my own nerves as I juggled my double life. After all, how could Eric possibly know what I was hiding? I had been careful, so careful. My work at the club wasn't something I flaunted, not even to myself. My wardrobe stayed locked away in a part of my closet Eric never ventured into. I always left the house after he was asleep, and I returned before he woke. It was a delicate balance, one I'd maintained for years. But lately cracks had begun to form. One night, as I prepared for work, I thought I heard footsteps outside my bedroom door. Pausing, my heart hammering, I waited for a knock or the sound of retreating steps. Neither came. Slowly, I opened the door, but the hallway was empty. Was it Eric? Had he been standing there, watching? The thought made my stomach churn. I couldn't let paranoia consume me, I told myself. Yet, when I looked at him across the dinner table the next evening, I couldn't help but wonder. His gaze lingered on me for a moment too long, his expression unreadable. Was I projecting my own guilt, or had he started piecing things together? It wasn't just him who had changed, I had too. At the club, I noticed myself scanning the crowd more frequently, my eyes searching for a face I both dreaded and longed to see. Every time the door opened, my pulse spiked. What would I do if he walked in? What would I say? The thought of Eric discovering my secret life was terrifying, but there was also a strange undercurrent of inevitability to it. Then came the slip-up, a moment of carelessness that I still replay in my mind. It was a Saturday evening, and I had just finished getting ready for my shift. My dress hung perfectly, my makeup was flawless, and my hair was swept into an elegant updo. I left my room to grab my coat from the hallway closet, only to find Eric standing there, his eyes widening as he took in my appearance. "Wow, Mom," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "You look amazing. Are you going somewhere special?" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Just out with some friends," I managed to say, forcing a smile. He nodded, his expression neutral, but as I walked away, I felt his eyes on me. Was he questioning me? Did he suspect something? That night at the club, I couldn't focus. My usual confidence faltered, my movements lacking their usual grace. My thoughts kept circling back to Eric, to his lingering gaze, to the question I feared he might already know the answer to. What exactly was I hiding? The more I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, the more the tension grew. Eric wasn't a child anymore. He was observant, thoughtful, and far more perceptive than I often gave him credit for. And deep down, I knew the truth. The walls I had built to keep my two worlds apart were beginning to crumble. The night everything shifted started out like any other. The club was buzzing with energy, its familiar rhythm pulsing through me as I moved across the stage. The crowd blurred into a sea of indistinct faces, a defense mechanism I had perfected over the years. I didn't see people anymore. I saw silhouettes, strangers who didn't know my name, my story, or my son waiting at home. But tonight, that illusion shattered. As I spun around the pole, my eyes instinctively scanned the room, a habit born of both caution and curiosity. And then I saw him. Eric. Standing near the entrance, his tall frame and unmistakable presence freezing me in place. My breath hitched, my hands faltered on the pole, and for a split second, the rhythm of my performance broke. He wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't his world. Eric's expression was unreadable as his gaze locked onto mine. Shock flickered in his eyes, but it quickly morphed into something else, something I couldn't name. He didn't move, didn't look away. He stood there, silently watching, as though trying to reconcile the image of the woman on stage with the mother he'd always known. The music swelled, pulling me back into the moment. I forced myself to continue, my movements mechanical, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't stop. Stopping would mean acknowledging him, and I wasn't ready to face what that meant. But no matter how much I tried to lose myself in the performance, I couldn't shake the weight of his gaze. When my set ended, I slipped off the stage and hurried toward the dressing room, my legs trembling beneath me. My coworkers greeted me with their usual nonchalance, but I barely registered their words. All I could think about was Eric, his face, his expression, the way he had stood there so composed, so steady, as though he belonged in a place like this. Minutes passed, maybe longer, before a knock on the dressing room door jolted me back to reality. One of the floor managers poked his head in, his expression apologetic. "Anna, someone's asking for you out front." My heart sank. I knew who it was. Straightening my dress and refreshing my lipstick, I prepared for the confrontation I had been dreading. When I stepped into the main floor, the club's usual noise and chaos seemed to fade, leaving only him. Eric sat at a small table near the edge of the stage, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp and unwavering. He watched me approach, his expression calm, almost unreadable. I stopped a few steps away, unsure of how to begin. "Eric," I said softly, my voice barely audible above the music. "What are you doing here?" He tilted his head slightly, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I could ask you the same thing." I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "This isn't how I wanted you to find out." "I figured," he said, his tone surprisingly gentle. "But here we are." I hesitated, my mind racing with explanations, excuses, anything to justify what he had just witnessed. But before I could speak, he leaned forward, his dark eyes meeting mine. "You were incredible," he said, his voice steady, sincere. "Confident. Beautiful. I get it now." "You get it?" I asked, frowning. He nodded. "You always tell me to live my life, to follow my heart. I guess I just never thought about what that advice meant for you." His words hit me like a wave, a mix of relief and confusion washing over me. "You're not embarrassed?" I asked hesitantly. "Embarrassed?" He shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "No. If anything, I'm proud. You're fearless, Mom." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away. I had spent so long fearing this moment, imagining the worst-case scenario. But Eric's calm, accepting presence was something I hadn't prepared for. His understanding felt like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge. For the rest of the evening he stayed, his presence a constant reminder of how much had changed. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was an adult, someone who saw me not just as his mother, but as a person with her own struggles, her own story. And for the first time in years, I felt truly seen. When the night ended, and I stepped out into the crisp air, Eric was waiting near the car. He smiled as I approached, his expression soft, understanding. "Ready to go home?" he asked. I nodded, the weight of the evening settling over me. As we drove through the quiet streets, I glanced at him, my heart heavy with gratitude and something deeper, something I couldn't quite name. Eric wasn't just my son anymore. He was my anchor, my confidant, and in a strange, unexpected way my equal. The events of the previous night played on a loop in my mind, each moment more surreal than the last. Eric had seen everything, yet his reaction was nothing like I had feared. Instead of anger or disappointment, there had been admiration in his eyes. But the reality of his presence at the club was something I couldn't ignore. How long had he known? Why was he there? And most pressing of all, what did this mean for us moving forward? The morning sunlight crept through the curtains as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I didn't want to face the day, but a knock on my bedroom door forced me to sit up. "Come in," I called, my voice hoarse from a restless night. Eric stepped inside, his demeanor calm as always. "Morning, Mom," he said, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one, the steam curling into the air. "Figured you might need this." "Thanks," I murmured, taking a sip. The warmth spread through me, but it did little to ease the tension coiled in my chest. "Eric, about last night." He raised a hand, cutting me off gently. "We don't have to talk about it if you're not ready." His words were kind, but I couldn't let this go unaddressed. "No, we do. I need to explain." He sat at the edge of the bed, his gaze steady. "Okay." I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "I started working at the club a few years ago, after your father left. It wasn't something I planned, it just happened. I needed to support us, and this was the only way I could make enough money to keep things stable." Eric listened intently, his expression thoughtful. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "I get it, Mom. You did what you had to do. I didn't want you to find out like this," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I was trying to protect you." He reached out, placing a hand over mine. "You don't have to protect me anymore. I'm not a kid." His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. He wasn't a child anymore. He was a man, one who had faced the reality of my choices and accepted them without judgment. But there was still so much left unsaid. "Why were you there?" I asked, the question burning in my throat. "How did you even end up at the club?" Eric hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "It was a coincidence, honestly. Some friends invited me out, and I didn't know where we were going until we got there. I had no idea you worked there. And when you saw me," I pressed, my heart pounding. "At first, I couldn't believe it," he admitted. "It was shocking, sure. But then I watched you, and I realized something. You weren't just dancing. You were commanding the room. You were confident, powerful. It was incredible to see that side of you." His words stirred something deep within me, a mix of pride and vulnerability. "It's not exactly a traditional job," I said with a weak smile. "Maybe not," he replied. "But it doesn't change how I see you. You're still my mom. And you're amazing." Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them away. "Thank you, Eric. That means more than you know." The conversation might have ended there, but Eric wasn't finished. "There's something else I need to say." "What is it?" I asked, my stomach twisting with apprehension. He hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "Last night, I saw you in a way I never have before. And it made me realize how much you've sacrificed for me, how much you've done to give me the life I have. I've always looked up to you. But now, I admire you even more." His confession was raw, unfiltered, and it left me speechless. For years, I had carried the burden of my choices, the guilt of hiding my life from him. But in that moment, Eric's words felt like absolution. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. "You don't have to say anything," he replied, his voice soft. "Just know that I'm here for you, no matter what." The bond between us had always been strong, but now it felt unbreakable. Eric had seen me at my most vulnerable, and instead of pulling away, he had stepped closer. It was a revelation I hadn't expected, one that filled me with a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. As the day unfolded, we fell into an easy rhythm. Eric didn't press me for details, and I didn't offer them. But the unspoken understanding between us was enough. By evening, the tension that had lingered since the night before had all but dissipated. But just as I thought the storm had passed, another challenge loomed on the horizon. Eric's friends had noticed his absence at the club, and questions were beginning to surface. Rumors spread quickly, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. That night, as we sat in the living room, I turned to Eric, my heart heavy. "We need to talk about what happens next." He nodded, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about that too. We can't let this affect your life," I said firmly. "Your future is too important." "And what about you?" he countered. "You've worked so hard to build this life for us. You don't deserve to have it fall apart." The determination in his voice was undeniable, and it filled me with both pride and fear. Eric was willing to fight for me, just as I had always fought for him. But the road ahead was uncertain, and I wasn't sure we were ready for the challenges it would bring. As the hours ticked by, we talked about everything: our fears, our hopes, and the choices that had brought us to this moment. By the time we finally said goodnight, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Eric's discovery had been the climax of my double life, the moment when everything I had tried to hide came to light. But it was also a turning point, a chance to rebuild, to move forward with honesty and strength. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain: we would face it together. In the days that followed Eric's discovery, life felt like it was teetering on the edge of something unrecognizable. The quiet routine we'd built over the years had been disrupted, replaced by unspoken tension and lingering questions. I tried to carry on as usual, cooking dinner, folding laundry, and making small talk, but there was an undercurrent to every interaction. Eric wasn't avoiding me, but he wasn't entirely himself either. The first real crack came during breakfast a few mornings later. Eric sat across from me, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. His brow furrowed in thought, and I knew he was wrestling with something. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting mine with a mix of determination and vulnerability. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked. I set my fork down, bracing myself. "Of course." He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "I've been thinking about everything, about you, the club, all of it. And I can't stop wondering, are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, is this the life you want?" he pressed. "I know you've done everything for me, and I'm grateful, but what about you? What about your dreams?" His words hit me like a blow to the chest. For years, I had buried my own desires, convincing myself that they didn't matter as long as Eric was taken care of. But now, faced with his earnest concern, I realized I couldn't keep hiding behind that excuse. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I guess I've been so focused on surviving that I never stopped to think about what I really want." Eric reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "You deserve more than just surviving, Mom. You deserve to be happy." His support was unwavering, but it also came with a cost. Word of Eric's presence at the club had started to spread, and I could feel the weight of judgment closing in. A neighbor stopped me in the grocery store one afternoon, her polite smile thinly veiling her curiosity. "I heard Eric's been spending time downtown," she said casually. "Must be hard keeping up with a college student these days." Her words were innocuous on the surface, but the implication was clear. People were talking, and it wouldn't be long before the truth came out. I could feel the walls closing in, the life I had worked so hard to protect unraveling before my eyes. One evening, Eric came home with a tense expression. "Mom, we need to talk." "What's wrong?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "It's about the club," he said, his voice tight. "Some of my friends are starting to ask questions. They're putting things together." The fear I had been suppressing came rushing to the surface. "What are they saying?" "Nothing concrete," he assured me. "But it's only a matter of time before someone figures it out." The thought of Eric being dragged into the fallout of my choices was unbearable. "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice cracking. "This is my mess, and now it's affecting you." He shook his head. "Don't apologize. You've done everything for me, and I'm not ashamed of you. But we need to figure out how to handle this." We spent the next few hours discussing our options, weighing the risks of honesty against the cost of secrecy. Eric was adamant that I shouldn't quit the club, but I couldn't ignore the growing threat to his reputation and future. As the days turned into weeks, the tension only grew. A few of Eric's friends distanced themselves, their curiosity giving way to judgment. I could see the frustration in his eyes, the way he clenched his jaw whenever someone made a careless comment. But he never wavered in his support for me. One evening, as I prepared for another shift at the club, Eric stopped me at the door. "Mom, wait." I turned, my coat halfway on. "What is it?" He hesitated, his gaze intense. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about surviving versus living. And I want you to know, whatever happens, I'm with you. We'll figure this out together." His words filled me with a bittersweet mixture of relief and sadness. I had spent so long protecting Eric from the harsh realities of my life, and now he was the one shielding me from the fallout. It wasn't the dynamic I had envisioned, but it was our reality. As I walked into the cold night, the club's neon lights glowing in the distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of a precipice. The choices we made in the coming days would define not just my future, but Eric's as well. And while I didn't have all the answers, one thing was certain: we would face it together no matter what came our way. The storm that had engulfed our lives in recent weeks was finally beginning to calm. Though the whispers and judgment hadn't disappeared entirely, Eric and I had found a rhythm in navigating this new reality. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. Eric's unwavering support had been my anchor. No matter how difficult things became, he stood by me, offering reassurance and understanding in ways I never imagined. The bond between us had grown stronger, and with that came a new sense of honesty in our relationship. There were no more secrets, no more half-truths. I had feared that Eric discovering the truth about my life would tear us apart, but instead it brought us closer. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, Eric turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "You know, Mom," he began, "this whole experience has taught me something important." "What's that?" I asked, curious. "That strength isn't about hiding who you are," he said. "It's about owning your choices, even when they're hard. You've done that your whole life, and I've never admired you more." His words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. They were a reminder of the lessons I had tried to teach him over the years. Lessons about resilience, integrity, and the importance of following one's own path. And now, he was reflecting those lessons back to me, showing me the value of the very strength I had doubted for so long. But Eric wasn't the only one who had grown through this experience. I, too, had been forced to confront my fears and reevaluate the way I viewed myself. For years, I had carried a sense of shame about my work, convinced that it defined me in the eyes of others. But Eric's acceptance had challenged that belief, showing me that my worth wasn't tied to how others saw me, but to how I saw myself. As I stepped back into the club for what would be one of my final shifts, I felt a sense of closure. The job had served its purpose, providing stability for Eric and me during a time when we desperately needed it. But now, with Eric on the verge of finishing college and my own sense of self-worth restored, I knew it was time to move on. That night, as I danced beneath the club's flickering lights, I wasn't performing for the crowd or even for myself. I was dancing for Eric, for the sacrifices we had both made and the unbreakable bond we had forged. Every step, every movement, was a tribute to the journey we had taken together. When the music faded and the lights dimmed, I stepped off the stage for the last time. A wave of applause filled the room, but my focus wasn't on the crowd. It was on Eric, who stood near the exit, waiting for me as he always did. His smile was warm, his eyes filled with pride. "Ready to go home?" he asked as I approached. I nodded, my heart full. "Yeah, I'm ready." As we walked into the crisp night air, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The road ahead wasn't without challenges, but I knew we would face them together. Eric's love and support had reminded me of something I had forgotten. That life wasn't just about surviving, it was about living fully and unapologetically. And as I looked at him, my son who had grown into a man, I realized that in teaching him how to be strong, I had rediscovered my own strength. Whatever the future held, we were ready for it together. What would you do if someone you loved discovered your deepest secret? Could you handle the fallout, or would it tear you apart? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories that explore the boundaries of love, family, and resilience. Stay tuned. Our next story will leave you speechless.